On the plane of Theros, gods rule from their thrones in Nyx, powerful aspects of abstract concepts like death, harvests, poison, and deceit. Given form, immense power and untold influence over the mortals who believe in them. For good or bad, the gods of Theros certainly shape the landscape, culture, and history of this plane. But that doesn't mean they all get equal screen time when we visit Theros in a set. In our first journey on Theros, with 3 sets forming the original block, there were enough cards to fully explore the personalities of each of the gods. But now in Theros Beyond Death, a single large set, there just isn't enough space in Nyx for everyone to make a substantial appearance. Even if your favorite god didn't get a dedicated card, they still likely showed up in Beyond Death. You just may have missed it. Let's take a look at how each god in the Pantheon of Theros shows up on the cards in Theros Beyond Death, but also answer the question, what originally happened to the missing gods of Theros Beyond Death? Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today we'll be exploring the histories and personalities of every god on Theros, as represented by the cards in Theros Beyond Death. In total, there are 15 to 16 gods on Theros, depending on if you count the now dead Xenagos as a god or not. Out of those, for simplicity's sake, let's say 15, only 7 actually get cards in Theros Beyond Death. These are your main monocolored gods: Heliod, god of the sun; Thassa, god of the sea; Purphoros, god of the forge; Nylea, god of the hunt; and Erebos, god of the dead. Included also are 2 minor gods: the new Clothis, god of destiny; and, out of nowhere, Altheros, god of passage. Each of these gods are well represented in Theros Beyond Death, painting a clear image of what each stands for, with the exception of Altheros, who essentially just has their standalone card, and that's basically it. Oh, but he does get a puppo. Still, don't worry, if your favorite god isn't among these 7, you can still find them in Beyond Death, you just have to look a little closer. Let's start with Karametra, the god of harvests. If you're a fan of this Selesnyan colored god, you give praise to fertility, protection of home and family, growth, and new life. During this ongoing war between gods, which started in the original Theros and spills into Beyond Death, Karametra does her best to protect innocent mortal life from the cataclysm of the Nyx at war. And this is perfectly shown in the Beyond Death card, Karametra's Blessing, a card that buffs a creature while sometimes also giving it insane protection. Karametra is also depicted on the card Idyllic Tutor. It may not be completely obvious to a lot of players, but the quote associated with this card's flavor text, quote, "You are loved, child," end quote, leads me to believe this can only be Karametra. And the final card associated with the god of harvests is, surprisingly, Mystic Repeal, whose flavor text is straight from the god herself, quote, "No power is too great to be undone," end quote. Erois, the Boros-colored god of victory, takes the shape of a centaur and embodies the honorable concepts of war, battle, tournaments, and victory. These are ideas like mercy, honor, strength, composure in the face of stressful situations, valor, heroism, and bravery. You'd think with the shape of a centaur that this race would see Erois as their deity of choice, but that's not really the case. Anyone who holds honor and bravery as virtues are welcome to the Eroan cities of worship, namely Akros. No card in Beyond Death better sums up the qualities of Erois quite like Indomitable Will. Quote, "Charge bravely, fight selflessly, act honorably. Erois will watch over you," end quote. In that, you can always test your skills in combat at the Eroan Games, gladiatorial competitions meant to find those most worthy to serve as champions of Erois. Those worthy will often experience the god's blessing in combat, a boon that gives them strength and the wits to use it. Very few become favored of Erois, but those who do, walk and fight in the blessing presence of the god of victory. Like 2 sides of the same coin, Erois has a twin brother, his opposite, Mogis, the god of slaughter. While Erois is the god of the positive aspects of battle, Mogis is the negative concepts of war: slaughter, brutality, pillaging, bloodlust, violence, and even cannibalism. Unlike his twin Mogis, who takes the form of a minotaur, is almost exclusively worshipped by that race. So take your pick, any Minotaur in Theros Beyond Death is closely tied to Mogis and his principles, with maybe the exception of the Nyx-born Warden of the Chained, which serves more as a servant of Closus than anything else. Minotaurs like Scophos Warleader, a brutal fighter from the Minotaur's home polis of Mogis, the maze city of Scophos, charges with the fury of the god itself. In combat, those blessed by Mogis experience a bloodlust that pushes them past normal physical restraints like pain, as depicted on Mogis' favor with the flavor text, quote, "Rage-crowned Mogis swiftly rewards the virtue of brutality," end quote. The powers of Mogis don't only allow for more savagery, it can also taint what was once good and true in warriors, taking even a small slight in a duel and twisting it to rage, jealousy, and resentment, turning trained champions mad. And while all Minotaurs pay homage to Mogis, there are those who hold a special place in this brutal cult. Those like the Slaughter Priests and Soul Reapers who transcend simple acts of depravity and war and practice the true crushing magic that is the essence of Mogis. Kruphix is probably one of the most important quote-unquote minor gods in the Therosan Pantheon. The god of horizons, the unseen, and mysteries, Kruphix can tap into unknown knowledge of anyone on Theros, and as such, has the greatest wisdom of past, present, and future of any god in the Pantheon. Kruphix was one of the first gods ever born in Nyx, as he remembers the birth of each of the current gods. He also has the power to enact the Silence, which breaks the connection between Nyx and the mortal plane, essentially cutting the gods from mortals and vice versa. He's also the first god to know and understand the Planeswalkers who visited Theros, learning of their journeys as they entered this world, and learning those that they feared on their home worlds. Kruphix knows of the Eldrazi Titans, the Phyrexians, and even Nicol Bolas, and he fears for Theros should those threats ever make it to his world. He is by far one of the wisest entities in the multiverse, yet in Beyond Death this powerful god is relatively absent. That silence he enacted back in original Theros to shield the mortal plane from the god's squabbling seems to have fallen, and Kruphix now is only tied to a few cards. One with the Stars is a powerful spell, showing how Kruphix is the true gateway to Nyx, the realm of the gods. Your purpose will determine if that's a good or bad thing. The other is Return to Nature, a card showing Kruphix's glimpse into the future, knowledge of the unknown. It shows the Spear of Heliod, Cursor, crumbled and discarded. Quote, "Far-seeing Kruphix glimpsed the end, Heliod's spear cast down and broken." End quote. Ithara, god of the polis, is defined by her devotion to cities, community, industry, civic wisdom, scholarship, and philosophy. If it's a part of civilized culture, it's under the stewardship of Ithara. Though cities often praise Ithara for protection, she isn't the god of cities specifically. That title was taken by a false manufactured god named Cacophony, created by a nightmare muse, the planeswalker Ashiok. Ithara was in fact the one responsible for killing Cacophony, god of cities, shortly after its birth. The cards tied to Ithara in Beyond Death deal mostly with her polis, Meletis, the city of philosophers. The saga, The Birth of Meletis, shows us the young city-state at the dawn of the gods gaining the favor of Ithara to overthrow an established, anti-Pantheon, tyrannical ruler. Ever since that ancient beginning, the people of Meletis have been honoring Ithara in hopes of future protections, as seen on Stern Dismissal. Quote, "Cities offer tribute to Ithara and carve her image into their walls, imploring her to protect them from the dangers of the wild." End quote. Pharika, god of afflictions, is often tied to deadly poisons and gorgons, who she is said to be the progenitor of. But this god is also secretly praised for their medicinal contributions. Poisons in small doses can oftentimes have healing properties, thus Pharika is believed to hold untold knowledge on medical herbs and magics throughout Theros. To those who follow this god, potions of health and poisons of death could both cut from the same vine. All that matters are your knowledge and your motivations. As the mother of Gorgons, all Gorgons seen in Theros Beyond Death likely worship Pharika, and come with their own deadly poison in the form of Death Touch. These would include creatures like Venomous Hierophant and Pharika's Spawn, the former of which speaks of the secret healing properties of Pharika's boon and how dangerous seeking that knowledge can be. Quote, "Many have sought snake twin Pharika's panacea. Do you wish to share their fate?" End quote. Pharika's chosen aren't just the snake-haired people on Theros, but also snakes themselves, like the Moss Viper. These snakes may live in the wild domains of Nylea, god of the hunt, but they're certainly blessed and protected by Pharika. Still, the god of Affliction is a fickle one, demanding offerings of precious potions and alchemic masterpieces, and if a follower doesn't appreciate the gifts she's given in terms of ingredients, she will gift them with a potion of her own brewing. This is Pharika's libation. Take it or leave it. Kuranos, god of storms, is a dual god of swift action and flashes of brilliance. Aligned to blue and red mana, Kuranos is impatient and demanding of his oracles, believing mortals to be reckless on one hand, yet praising those who take swift, decisive action on the other. So where is the middle ground? Should you act swift and risk being reckless? The key to his worship is to be decisive, quick-witted, in a sense acting quickly but only when you have a decisive purpose, not carelessly acting without a thought or plan. Kuranos is the god of brilliance and lightning. Flashes of genius and epiphanies are his boons. He also loves shooting lightning all over the place, the literal physical representation to flashes of brilliance. So any card with lightning, speed, or storms in them likely correspond to Kuranos. Cards like Storm's Wrath show just how little tolerance Kuranos has for those who anger him. Quote, "Distant thunder rumbled, a dread forewarning of Kuranos' displeasure." End quote. These storms, while often commanded by the god himself, also flow through his oracles like the Storm Heralds. Outside of lightning and brilliance, Kuranos is also known as the god of quickness, as fast as lightning as they say, both in mind and body. Escape velocity is a good example of this god's more physical boons. And finally, one of my favorite minor gods, Fanox, god of deceit. This is a really strange god based on the concepts of lies, betrayals, planning, and secrets. This is by far the worst god to make a deal with in the entire Pantheon, but these aspects are so powerful in the day-to-day life of Theros that they actually turned a mortal man into a god. Now, there are some massive mysteries surrounding how gods on Theros are created. We know belief and devotion creates a god, but do they just pop out of nothing, or do mortals have to become gods? In at least 2 cases, we know that mortals in fact became gods, one being the satyr Xenagos, who sort of cheated his ascension, but the other is Fanox. As a mortal, he managed to gamble, deceive, and cheat his way out of the Underworld, the first mortal ever to escape the domain of Erebos, which caused him to ascend to godhood. Now, Fanox is praised by hucksters throughout Theros, who in turn receive boons to help them in their deceptions. Fanox routinely pits completely benign groups of people against one another, seeding plots of betrayal to start wars for his own purposes. As the first of the returned, zombies or escaped souls of the Underworld, Fanox has a special connections with those who have since followed his path and escaped their deaths. The returned as a result are all loosely tied to Fanox. In Theros Beyond Death, this would include creatures like Grim Physician and Grey Merchant of Asphodel. In the original Theros block, Fanox is seen having a grand plan for the returned, some scheme that's never really realized in the story. But on the card Minions Return, we see how he looks to control these wayward souls, but the truth behind this is still very much unknown. His true oracles are those who have insight into his secrets but offer half-truths to those seeking an advantage in life. There are no free answers, and what you get may not always be what you expect. One of his greatest oracles, housed in the Temple of Deceit, is Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths. Fanox is a case where the story could have explored a lot more of this god, as he had some plans in the works with the returned, along with striking a deal with Ashiok, one of the main characters in Beyond Death. But in terms of Fanox's appearance in Beyond Death, this is all we got. While we only got to see 7 gods, with Theros only having a single card outside of himself repping him, in the entire set of Theros Beyond Death, your favorite god still makes at least a cameo appearance. Yet, why were so many gods missing when they're so iconic to players who love this plane? It all has to do with the way Wizards of the Coast structures how they release sets now. Back in the original Theros, we had a 3-set block system, so a story and a plane could be explored through 3 different sets, all contained in an overall block storyline. Now, however, we have a much more restricted one big set for an entire block. This means we had a massively reduced card pool to fill out the story of Beyond Death. Fewer mythic card slots meant cuts to the overall Pantheon. So what could have saved the gods in Beyond Death? This single set block structure has been around for some time now, and its first real test was our return to Ravnica for the War of the Spark. The workaround here was we spent 3 big single sets on Ravnica fleshing out the story, so in a sense it was a return to the 3-set blocks of old. They all 3 just happened to be big sets. This was done because the story was massive, and if they didn't, they would have surely cut some of the guild's involvements in the set by a large margin, a sin that would have made many players' heads spin, as some closely identify with their guild of choice. Theros could have been done in a very similar way. Have a few sets based on the Theros Beyond Death story, have gods featured in each, and boom, problem solved. The full Pantheon gets representation. A second method also follows something spearheaded in War of the Spark, downshifting card rarities. In War of the Spark, we had loads of Planeswalkers for the story, and they were all represented in specific cards despite the limited number of mythic slots. They did this by downshifting the Planeswalker rarity to rare and even uncommon in some cases, something never seen before. Their power levels of course changed as well, but it was a simple way to have these characters really show up in the world and story without having the set be 2/3 mythic Planeswalkers. Theros could have downshifted some of the minor gods to rare or even uncommon to give their fans the representation they wanted. Gods in some capacity already act a lot like enchantments. The lower rarity gods could have been more passive enchantments with less impactful effects, just like War of the Spark's Planeswalkers, and it would have been a satisfying follow-up to Theros, giving us the reason we love this plane, the gods. But what we got was a world missing those gods. There are a lot of ways we could have had all of our favorite gods show up in Theros Beyond Death. Let me know what you would have done in the comment section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, show your support for the channel by leaving a like, subscribing, and of course, hitting that notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. As always guys, thank you all so much for joining, and until next time, see ya!